Imagine a world that keeps on turning, but out of sync. Holy days arrive late. Sacred seasons no longer fall at their appointed times. Days that were once divine covenants between God and man are now hollow markings on a calendar. Everything still seems to function, yet no longer aligned with the rhythm of heaven. A symphony out of tune, a promise read in the wrong hour. Could this be more than just a historical oversight? Could it be a silent conspiracy? Has the Babylonian calendar, with its fluctuating lunar cycle, been imposed on humanity not to help them keep time, but to cause them to miss their appointments with God? The Book of Jubilees does not remain silent about this. A striking passage declares, "Those who follow the moon will go wrong in the holy days, and defile the feasts of the Lord." Not all ways of keeping time are neutral. Some rhythms are designed to draw people near to God, and others, offbeat, distorted, cause prayers to miss their destination. In the early chapters of the book, the angel of the Lord warns Moses if the people do not keep the correct calendar, the holy days will gradually be forgotten, celebrated on the wrong days, and as a result, worship itself will be misdirected, not because they intentionally worship false gods, but because they have strayed from the sacred timing set by God. The Babylonian calendar, with its months rising and falling with the moon, and its annual arbitrary adjustments, was eventually accepted by man as the standard, and from that, a quiet slipping began when people chose convenience over sacred precision, when they began to celebrate holy days on the wrong dates, yet still believed they were doing right. If Satan cannot destroy worship, he only needs to do one thing: change the day. Shift the meeting between humanity and God just slightly, enough to make everything wrong. And in that subtle shift, generations began to miss their seasons, miss the season of grace, miss the season of covenant, miss the season of judgment, yet still believe they are walking rightly, because the rhythm of the world sounds more reasonable than the rhythm of heaven. How could it be that all of humanity, over thousands of years, from east to west, has come to follow a calendar completely different from the one God established at the dawn of creation? How is it that the sacred festivals, once aligned with light, the sun, the seasons, and fixed weeks, are now governed by a lunar cycle that is unstable, shifting, and never truly consistent? We often think of it as mere convenience, an administrative change, a minor adjustment in organizing time. But if we look deeper, could it be more than just a mistake, but an ancient, subtle, and persistent conspiracy? Babylon, that name echoes throughout Scripture as a symbol of chaos, pride, and rebellion against God. It was not just a political empire, but a spiritual system, a hidden order designed to replace the sacred with the secular, to substitute God with human power. And one of Babylon's quietest weapons was the calendar. There, rituals no longer followed light, but followed the moon, an image tied to change, to cycles, and to instability. Instead of living by the steady rhythm of God, people began to follow a distorted cycle, one where holy seasons shift every year, and the soul no longer has a fixed anchor. This wasn't a sudden destruction. It was a silent exchange. Instead of teaching people to rebel against God, Babylon made worship into a form, correct in ritual, but wrong in timing. Instead of destroying the temple, they changed the day of sacrifice. Instead of erasing the covenant, they moved its commemoration to a different moment, and people, over time, didn't realize they were no longer living by the Creator's calendar, but by a schedule designed to draw them away from His presence. A slight shift, a prolonged silence, a compromise that seemed harmless. But this is how Babylon works, not by destroying the holy, but by replacing it, until man not only misses the season, but misses God Himself. While the modern world is familiar with the concept of leap years, uneven months, and ever-shifting calendars, the Book of Jubilees presents something entirely different. A sacred 364-day calendar, stable, unwavering, unchanging. It's not just a tool for tracking time. It's a blueprint for the divine order of the universe, established by God at creation. According to Jubilees, a year contains exactly 52 weeks, that is, 13 complete cycles of 4 weeks each, aligned with the 4 seasons of the year, no stray days, no need for leap years, and the miraculous part, every holy day, from the Sabbath, the covenant festival, the festival of lights, to the days of remembrance, falls on the same day of the week, every single year. No longer does the Sabbath fall on Saturday one year and Friday the next. No longer are holy days shifted because the moon doesn't align. Every moment is marked by light, not by the dim, wavering cycle of the moon, but by the clear, consistent path of the sun. This structure, 13 weeks, x 4 seasons, is no accident. In ancient Hebrew tradition, the number 4 represents the fullness of the universe, the 4 directions, and 13 is the number of covenant from God's promise to the Patriarchs. Combined, they form a complete year, reflecting perfect harmony between heaven and earth, between man and God. It's more than math. This is a sacred portrait of time, where every day, every week, every month carries a divine rhythm set precisely in place, like every note in a symphony written by the Creator Himself. This calendar does not flex to meet human needs. It demands that people adjust themselves to heaven's rhythm, not bend heaven to fit their lives. And that is what makes it holy. Each day becomes a harmony with God, never late, never off-key. This is the calendar of light, of covenant, and of the sacred memory of a world that once moved in perfect sync before it was stolen, in complete contrast to the 364-day steadfast calendar of Jubilees. The Babylonian calendar is based on the lunar cycle, a journey of continual change, instability, and constant adjustment. Each month is either 29 or 30 days, making the year never align with the solar cycle. The result, holy days shift year to year, out of step, out of season, and sometimes stripped of meaning. This system didn't come from divine revelation. No angel told Moses to observe the moon to establish holy days. This is a human invention, one that flourished in civilizations like Babylon. where the moon was worshipped as a divine being, associated with pagan deities and mystical rites. When the Israelites were exiled in Babylon, they were influenced not only by culture and language, but also by how time was measured, and gradually, upon returning from exile, the lunar calendar, accepted halfway and convenient in practice, was adopted into temple worship, a seemingly small substitution, but theologically, a massive departure. The Qumran community, guardians of the Book of Jubilees and many ancient writings, fiercely opposed the lunar calendar. They saw it as a ritual defilement, a betrayal of the sacred covenant of time. For them, celebrating a holy day on the wrong date was not a clerical error. It was a grievous offense against God, and they had reason. A festival kept on the wrong day no longer falls within the divine cycle set from the beginning. It may look the same outwardly, but has lost all its sacred power. Like a priest offering incense when God is not present, like knocking on a door, but the room is already empty. Yet the Babylonian calendar eventually became the standard, not because it was right, but because it was more flexible, easier to adjust, and fit better with the agricultural and political seasons of the time. God was pushed out of the schedule. Man decided when the holy days should be, instead of letting God appoint them. And from there, a new current in Scripture began, no longer guided by the original light, but by an unstable orbit, a man-made order, proclaiming itself as holy. But if you return to Jubilees, you'll see God does not change, and his time, though hidden, still moves, still waits, still remains the standard. It is only that humanity has chosen not to follow anymore. There are choices in life that seem small, like how we measure time, schedule rest, or select feast days, yet they hold a deep spiritual dimension few recognize, because behind every system of time is not just calendar management, but a worldview, a living theology. The Book of Jubilees says that on Mount Sinai, the angel of the Lord personally gave Moses the structure of sacred time, with each week, each season, each festival arranged according to an eternal timetable, not for Moses to choose the days of worship, but to remember and pass down the fixed times God had ordained from creation. This is heavenly time, the rhythm of covenant between heaven and earth. No one has the authority to change it. But opposed to that stands another system, the Babylonian calendar, not formed by faithful angels, but according to ancient texts like Enoch and Jubilees, influenced by fallen angels, beings who once lived in light, but departed from divine order to create their own, a rebellious heaven, where rituals are distorted, time is disrupted, and the purpose of worship is redirected. In Babylon, the moon, symbol of change and cycles, replaces the stable light of the sun. Time no longer revolves around God, but around human calculations and other unseen forces. Holy days are scattered, rituals modified to fit politics, economics, and folk mythology. And the question is, whose rhythm are you living by? Each morning you wake, each festival you observe, each week you begin, you step into a rhythm that has already been set. But where did it come from? From God's calendar, given on Sinai, preserved in the caves of Qumran, or from a worldly calendar, crafted to serve the agendas of beings no longer walking in the light. Two calendars, two worlds. On one side, eternal stability, built upon light and covenant. On the other, fluctuation, painted by power and forgetfulness. And you, even if unaware, are making a choice every single day. Not just choosing hours and minutes, but choosing whether you are living in the rhythm of God or in the rhythm of the one who seeks to replace him. Before there was law, before there was a temple, even before there was man, God established time. According to the book of Jubilees, time was not a byproduct of creation. It was the very foundation of creation itself. When he separated light from darkness, day from night, and set the sun in its place to give light, divide, and determine appointed times, he wasn't just forming a structured universe. He was making a covenant with it through the rhythm of time. It is no accident that in Jubilees, the angel assigned to guard time watches over it, not by the moon, but by the movement of the sun. The sun, a symbol of steadfastness, of unchanging light, becomes the divine clock of God. The moon, ever-changing and unstable, was never given the role of measuring holy days, and this is the heart of the matter in Scripture. Time is not merely a unit of measurement, it is part of the covenant. Every day, every week, every season is a reminder that the world does not turn on its own, but lives in a cycle established by the Creator. The rhythm of the universe is a divine symphony, and mankind, when walking according to God's calendar, is moving in harmony with that composition. Jubilees emphasizes something even deeper when people follow the sacred calendar. They are keeping the memory of God alive in their everyday lives. They don't need to climb a mountain or enter the temple. Simply knowing that today is the first day, the seventh day, or the third week of the second season is enough to awaken the awareness that they are living within a moment appointed by God. And if time is a covenant, then changing time is a betrayal of that covenant. That is why, according to Jubilees, deviation from the 364-day calendar is not just an error. It is a disconnection from a sacred reality. As if you have an appointment with God, but arrive on the wrong day, the door remains shut, the prayer echoes, but he is not there. Time, through the lens of Jubilees, is not just history. It is a silent language God uses to speak to the world, and the sacred calendar is the first alphabet of that language. Not every deviation begins in innocence. According to Jubilees, and confirmed by the book of Enoch, the moment humanity strayed from the sacred calendar was not a random mistake, but the result of intentional interference from beings who once belonged to the heavenly realm. Before the great flood, when the fallen angels, known as the Watchers, abandoned their posts in heaven to descend to earth, they didn't just teach mankind about weapons, cosmetics, or sorcery. They also taught how to observe the moon, how to calculate time by lunar cycles, and how to construct systems of time measurement entirely different from God's calendar. At first glance, this may seem like an advancement, a scientific tool, a method of organizing life. But in the broader picture of Scripture, it is a disruption of sacred order. Jubilees makes it clear they will go wrong in the holy days and seasons because they observe the moon rather than the sun. And their offerings will no longer be accepted. When humanity changed the way it viewed time, it didn't just change how life was lived, it changed how God was encountered. A holy festival offered on the wrong day no longer falls within the appointed moment. A season shifted causes the soul to miss its appointment with grace. A misaligned cycle leads to misdirected worship. Thinking they are honoring God, people may in fact be offering devotion to something else at a different time, where He is no longer present. And this is the quietest tragedy in the history of human spirituality, believing we are living in the faith. But having long stepped out of heaven's rhythm, that misalignment doesn't stop at rituals. It affects everything: prayers, fasts, offerings, even the days meant to commemorate the covenant. A small shift each year, over centuries, becomes a road so far lost that the original path cannot be traced. And if you ask, when did it all begin to go out of sync? Jubilees gives a clear answer. When mankind began listening to angels who were no longer faithful, when light was replaced by the fragile reflection of the moon, when people began calculating time instead of preserving sacred memory. And from there, days ceased to be holy, seasons ceased to be sacred. And heaven's rhythm became a distant call, barely heard by any. Not everyone accepted the change. In a world drifting toward lunar calendars, where sacred festivals were moved, and the divine rhythm distorted by earthly calculation, some groups refused to break from God's timing. Foremost among them, the Qumran community, those who lived in seclusion near the Dead Sea, among windswept caves of sand and stone. They are known as the Essenes, a separatist group who broke from the Jerusalem temple not because of bloodshed, but because of a corrupted calendar. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered at Qumran, more copies of the Book of Jubilees were found than even major texts like Isaiah or Psalms. This reveals that to them, Jubilees was not a supplemental work, but a cornerstone for measuring time and fidelity to God. They lived by the 364-day calendar, divided into 52 perfect weeks, with each feast, each season, each holy day falling into the sacred positions ordained by God. They recorded with meticulous care the times for offerings, covenant memorials, and especially the Sabbath, which always fell on the seventh day, never shifted. This wasn't mere calendar science for Qumran. Keeping the sacred timing was keeping the bond of covenant with God. A single day wrong meant stepping out of heaven's order. A mistimed feast meant missing the chance to meet Him. A misaligned calendar meant no longer recognizing the hour of divine visitation. So, when the world around them chose a more flexible, more acceptable, more convenient calendar, they chose a different path, set apart, silent, but spiritually defiant. They were called extreme. They were excluded from mainstream religious life. But they preserved something priceless, the original rhythm of light. In a world spiraling into theological chaos, they stood firm like pillars of bronze, holding on to a melody that only attentive souls can still hear. And it is because of them, because of hands that tirelessly copied in the dark, that we still know the Book of Jubilees today, not just as a book about time, but as a testimony of loyalty in an age that rejected God by changing the day. God's calendar, 364 days without deviation, fixed by the motion of the sun, anchoring every festival, every holy day, was once humanity's original sacred rhythm. But if that rhythm was ordained from heaven, the pressing question remains who intervened to replace it, and why the answer is not found in a single moment, but in a series of quiet decisions, passed down through generations. When the Babylonian Empire rose, it didn't conquer only with swords. It reshaped chronology, systems of timekeeping, and most importantly, the religious calendar. With its volatile lunar cycle, it introduced a flexible calendar, adjustable by agriculture, politics, or royal decree, and humanity, weary from war, from exile, from chaos, accepted it as a simpler way to live and organize. Convenience began to replace faithfulness. Small compromises became tradition, and from there, an unspoken betrayal took root, silent but complete. After Babylon, even when the Jews returned and rebuilt the temple, the lunar calendar remained, not because they had forgotten the old one, but because they had grown used to the ease. Religious leaders, instead of returning to Jubilees or the revelation at Sinai, chose to maintain the lunar calendar because it was flexible, inclusive, and less likely to provoke conflict with surrounding empires. And what was the result? Holy festivals, the very covenant between God and man, gradually lost their original dates. Covenant commemorations no longer aligned with God's appointed time. The Festival of Lights was no longer celebrated at the very moment the sun shifted seasons, and the sacred meaning was diluted. The festivals remained, the rituals were intact, but the soul of the celebration was gone. A sacred melody played out of rhythm, a promise read on the wrong day. Today, few recognize this. We live within a calendar system that appears neutral, but carries a legacy, the replacement of God with human calculation. And the tragedy is, it didn't happen out of malice, but through compromise, through weariness, through the human desire for ease over truth. So who changed God's calendar? Not just pagan kings, but generation after generation, choosing convenience over truth. Individual after individual believing. Changing a day doesn't matter until they no longer know which day God ordained. Each morning, we wake, check the time, glance at the calendar, plan our week, our year. But how many of us ever stop to ask, whose calendar are we using? Not everyone chooses wrongly on purpose, but even unknowingly. Most of us are living by a rhythm that has long drifted from the original sacred intent, not just a few days off, but out of sync with the entire system of time God engraved into the universe at creation. Have you ever wondered, is Easter still celebrated on time? Is Christmas truly the season of God's incarnation, or a conveniently moved date shaped by culture? Is the Sabbath you observe still falling within the sacred moment. God-ordained Jubilees warns, when people do not keep the appointed times, they will defile the holy days, and God will no longer accept their offerings, not because their hearts are insincere, because they missed the appointment. No one arrived at the meeting on time, and the greeting became useless. In a world of technology and atomic clocks, the idea of sacred misalignment may sound unreasonable, but the spiritual universe does not run on minutes and seconds. It moves in fixed, sacred cycles, and when we step out of sync, even slightly, the soul can no longer catch the signal of heaven's invitation. Imagine you come to the temple, offer incense, pray. But heaven's gate had already closed. Yesterday, you came late, not intentionally, but you missed it. Missing the season in agriculture can mean a lost harvest, but in the spiritual realm, it means the loss of life, the loss of a moment to be renewed, the loss of an opportunity to touch the light, and not because God didn't want to meet you, but because you came on a day when he was no longer there. Time, to God, is not a utility. It is covenant. It is invitation. It is a door that opens and closes in perfect rhythm, and only those who know the time may walk through it. So today, whose calendar are you living by, the world's calendar or God's? That answer will determine whether you are still living in the season of grace, or whether you missed it long ago. We were raised in a world that treats time as a neutral tool, an invisible framework, dividing days into hours, years into seasons, meant for organizing life. But in Scripture, and especially in the book of Jubilees, time is anything but neutral. It is a sacred instrument, capable of creating divine order, or breaking it at the very root. From the very first chapter of Genesis, God did not create the world with weapons or declarations of war. He used time, day 1, day 2, a 7-day week, and on the 7th day, he rested. Time was the tool of creation. Every moment carried meaning. Every appointed time was part of a covenant. And if God used time to build, then Satan only needs to do one thing to change the day. He doesn't need to ban worship. He doesn't need to tear down the temple. He just needs to make people worship, off schedule. In that moment, everything looks the same. The feast still happens. The prayers are still said, but like a sacred song played out of tune, the words are right, but the melody no longer reaches heaven. A slight shift, but enough to silence the resonance of the entire spiritual symphony, and the presence of God, which comes in the appointed time, is no longer there. Jubilees makes it clear, when men change the appointed times, they will no longer know the holy seasons. They will celebrate in darkness, offer sacrifices on days not chosen, and believe they are walking with God while having long since departed from him. Satan does not oppose worship. He simply shifts the rhythm. He turns the zealous into those who worship at the wrong time, not because they don't love God, but because they no longer hear the right rhythm, like a divine dance thrown off beat, like a lover showing up for a date on the wrong day. The love is still there, but the meeting never happens. This is why, in the theology of time, the question is not only, do you worship, but do you worship at the right time, in the right rhythm, in the sacred season time, in the end, is not something that merely passes. It is the sacred language through which God invites man into communion. And if we can no longer hear that rhythm, every ritual becomes an echo in an empty chamber. Time is not neutral. It is a battlefield. And you, by the calendar you live by, are standing on one side or the other. When people think of calendars, they often imagine schedules, administrative units. But in the biblical view, especially in the book of Jubilees, the calendar is not just a list of dates. It is the structure by which we meet with God. And if that structure is misaligned, the encounter no longer happens at the right moment. What is being stolen is not just original feast days or the true Sabbath. It's the sacred moments God Himself chose to dwell among us. Those days are not just commemorations. They are divine appointments, like a window of heaven that only opens at the right moment, like a gate of light, which can only be entered if you know the hour. But what if people offer sacrifices on a different day? What if they pray in a season that is not appointed? What if they fast, weep, and praise, but not within the rhythm God has set? Jubilees speaks with painful clarity. Their offerings will not be remembered in heaven. They will think they are doing something holy. But in truth, they are defiling what was preordained. This forces us to ask a quiet but serious question. Could this be why so many prayers today go unanswered? Not because God does not hear, but because we are speaking into a time when heaven's gate is already shut. Imagine this. A child calls their father, but always at a time when the father cannot answer. After many tries, the child begins to wonder, does my father still love me? But the problem isn't love, it's mistimed communication. When time is off, the entire spiritual world shifts. Seasons of grace pass by, unnoticed and unreceived. Heavenly visitations go unfelt, and people, lost in temporal confusion, live in darkness, thinking they are still in the light. The frightening thing is not that God has turned His face away, but that man has lost his divine clock and doesn't even realize it. And so, people build rituals, construct churches, plan events, but they have come too late. They have missed the appointment. What is being stolen is not just a date, but the encounter, the presence, the very moment God longs to dwell with us, yet we no longer recognize it. And that question still echoes. Is the reason many petitions are no longer heard because we are speaking at a time when heaven has closed its door among all the attributes of God described in Scripture? Love, justice, mercy. There is one rarely mentioned, yet present from Genesis to Revelation. God is a God of order. He does not create through chaos, but through separation, distinction, and structure. Light separated from darkness, sky from earth, the sea confined to its boundaries. And among all, time was His first law. Before there were humans, before there were commandments, He established day 1, day 2, and on day 7, He rested, not out of weariness, but to bless and sanctify time itself. A 7-day week with a fixed day of rest became the foundation of every covenant that followed. That's why, When man steps out of sacred rhythm, he is not just changing dates. He is withdrawing himself from the foundation of covenant, no longer walking with God in the cycle he established. Man begins creating his own calendar, choosing his own times, establishing his own seasons, and in doing so, the sacred bond is no longer extended through faithfulness, but is severed in silence. Jubilees emphasizes that keeping the correct day, the correct time, is not about ritualism, but about remaining in a living covenant. If the Sabbath was set from the dawn of creation, then anyone walking outside of it is not just breaking a rule, they are living outside the holy order. And this is not just a matter of ancient history. In every personal life, the sacred order is still at work. If your spiritual life feels chaotic, lifeless, disconnected, ask yourself, am I still living in the sacred rhythm? Do I still know when God is calling me to rest, to pray, to meet with Him? Because God does not dwell in chaos. He inhabits order, and that order begins with time, not time imposed by man, but time kept by light and the sun. As recorded in Jubilees, to step out of that rhythm is to walk out of the light. It is not that God has left us, but that we have changed the appointment and forgot to let Him know God is a God of order. If we desire to meet Him, we must move in the rhythm He has set, not early, not late, but on time. In every religion, worship is the highest act, where man brings to God his purest offerings, faith, sacrifice, prayer. But there is one thing few ever consider: worship can be swapped, and the worshipper never realize it. Jubilees warns of this early on, not with thunder, but with a chilling detail. They will offer sacrifices on the wrong day, at a time not appointed by God, and their offering will become defiled, not because their hearts are wrong, not because their gifts lack sincerity, but because the time of offering no longer falls within the covenant. This is Satan's most cunning strategy. He doesn't need people to reject God. He doesn't destroy altars. He doesn't stop prayer. He only needs to do one thing: change the day, shift the Sabbath to another time, move the covenant feast outside of the sacred week, turn blessed seasons into secular festivals, and thus, people believe they are walking with God while walking in error. This exchange does not happen through bold declarations. It happens in the quiet convenience of modern life, in the compromise that says, as long as my heart is sincere, it doesn't matter. But Jubilees disagrees. Time, as stated, is not neutral. Each day is a key. Each feast is a gateway into the heavens. And if you use the wrong key, the gate will not open. Worship, if not done at the right time, falls into silence. It is not remembered in heaven. It does not touch God's heart. It carries no spiritual effect. That is not punishment. It is the natural result of being disconnected from the sacred calendar God has established. It's like sending a letter to an address that's no longer occupied, like knocking on the door of a house where the lights have gone out. You may stand there all night with all your love, but no one will answer. Because worship does not only require the right recipient, it requires the right timing. Not any time will do. Not every hour is accepted. There are hours that have been sanctified, and there are hours no matter how beautiful, that are still wrong. Satan knows this, and he doesn't need to destroy faith, only to distort rhythm, because one misstep is enough to send the entire spiritual journey into silence. And so the song is sung, but heaven does not reply. The sacrifice is offered, but no smoke rises. The prayer is lifted, but heaven's gates remain shut, not because God refused, but because we came on the wrong day. There is something astonishing when we read the book of Jubilees carefully. Every patriarch, from Adam to Noah, from Abraham to Jacob, lived according to the 364-day calendar, not the lunar calendar, not a system of shifting months and leap years, but a complete, fixed cycle, unchanging, handed down by God from the very beginning. Adam, the first man, was taught by angels about the Sabbath, about the weekly rhythm. Noah, the one who survived the great flood, preserved the sacred record of time and stored it in the ark to pass on to future generations. Abraham, the father of faith, celebrated the covenant feasts on the correct days, in their appointed seasons. He wasn't just given the promise, he was synchronized with God's calendar. Jubilees does not mention this as a side note. It presents it as a central axis for understanding the entire story of salvation. Time, if misaligned, pulls everything else off course. Rituals, covenants, blessings. This is why the saints, though separated by centuries, all shared a common rhythm of life. A year of 364 days, 4 seasons, each with 13 weeks, 7 days per week, with the Sabbath always falling on the 7th day. Only when profane forces, the fallen angels, pagan cultures, and especially the influence of Babylon and later empires, infiltrated religious life, did humanity begin to drift from the sacred orbit. It is no coincidence that after the exile, many festivals were rescheduled. It is no coincidence that the Qumran community reacted so fiercely against the lunar calendar. And it is no coincidence that the scrolls hidden in the caves preserved the old calendar, the sacred one, the one lived by Adam, Abraham, and Noah. This calendar was not just a way to count time. It was the silent bloodstream within the theology of the patriarchs. To keep the correct calendar was to preserve the relationship with God. To celebrate the feasts on time was to maintain the flow of divine promise. Today, many believe that sincerity is enough. But if the saints, those chosen by God Himself, had to walk by this sacred calendar, how can we think we can live out of rhythm and still remain in the light? Perhaps returning to the 364-day calendar is not just an academic decision, but an act of humility, to step back into the order of the chosen, to walk again as the patriarchs walked, and to know every day we live is a step in a sacred history that has never been broken. Some books were excluded from the Bible for being unreliable, others for holding strange theology, but Jubilees is different. It was not set aside because it was absurd, but because it was dangerous. If the contents of Jubilees are true, if the 364-day calendar is the original one established by God, then the implications are profound, because that would mean the entire liturgical system we use today is running on the wrong schedule. Easter, Christmas, Lent, Advent, the Sabbath, All may be occurring out of alignment with heaven's clock. This is no longer an academic debate. It becomes a theological crisis. And perhaps that's why silence surrounds Jubilees, not because of doubt, but because of fear. Fear of having to rewrite. Fear of accepting that what has been preserved for thousands of years may have been wrong from the root. Fear of shaking the faith community. Fear of choosing between long-standing tradition and a quiet, hidden truth. In Catholicism, Jubilees was never included in the official canon. In post-exilic Judaism, the book was removed from communal readings. Even many modern Bibles make no mention of it. Instead, only a few scholars, a few archaeologists, and the Qumran community have preserved this book like a treasure. And yet, the Book of Jubilees did not disappear. It lives in the oldest scrolls found at the Dead Sea. It is considered canonical by the Ethiopian Church. It returns through excavations, academic studies, and the rising awareness of a haunting question: are we worshipping God on a day He is not present? And if that is true, then the issue is not merely a wrong calendar, but a wrong God. Because Jubilees is clear when holy days are not kept on the correct dates. People will believe they are serving the Lord, but in fact, they are offering worship to other powers. It is a warning that shakes foundations, and perhaps, for that reason, Jubilees was not excluded because it was weak, but because it was too strong, not because it was false, but because, if true, it would shake everything else to its core. And in a world that prefers religious stability over truth upheaval, silence becomes the easiest way to keep the storm at bay. But that storm, sooner or later, will rise. Because sacred truth, no matter how long it is hidden, always finds its way back. While most of the Christian world runs on a calendar system standardized by lunar cycles, councils, and astronomers, there is one place that quietly preserves the sacred rhythm from the beginning: Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is unlike Western traditions. They do not hold to 66 or 73 books in their Bible. They hold more than 80, including Jubilees and Enoch, as canonical. And more remarkably, they live by a different system of time, a 364-day year, a liturgical calendar that is fixed, consistent, and not subject to the fluctuations of the moon or the Gregorian calendar. Every sacred season, every holy day, is preserved exactly as in the days of the Patriarchs. In Ethiopia, the Sabbath is always on the same day, never drifting from year to year. The covenant commemorations are not moved by moon phases. Priests and people alike know which days are open heaven, and they arrive on time. This prompts a deeper question. Could Ethiopia, which still holds to the calendar of Jubilees, be living closer to God than we imagine? Not because they are wealthier or more developed, but because they have not lost the sacred rhythm that God set in motion at creation. It's astonishing to think, while the rest of the world wrestles with Easter formulas, Sabbath debates, and festival shifts driven by councils, Ethiopia quietly keeps the ancient rhythm unshaken, not out of modernity, but out of faithfulness, in mountaintop monasteries, where monks live hidden lives. Their prayers rise with incense, and they offer sacrifices at the appointed hour, not by the international clock, but by heavens. And if time is truly the key to divine encounter, then perhaps they are touching a presence that we, with our modern calendars, have let slip away, like a boat still riding the proper tide of the universe. Ethiopia flows with the breath of God, while the rest of us paddle upstream, thinking we are progressing, but drifting farther away. Perhaps the time has come to turn around and learn again how to live by the calendar of grace. And maybe, in this journey, Ethiopia is not the one left behind, but the one who still remembers the appointment, remembers God's rhythm, and remembers the path home. When we think of prophecy, we often imagine booming revelations, visions in dreams, or symbolic signs. But in the book of Jubilees, prophecy is not only spoken by the chosen, it is embedded in time itself. The sacred calendar, with its Jubilee cycles, is a living prophecy. Each 49-year cycle is a turn of the wheel of grace, and when the 50th year arrives, it is a time of release, restoration, and covenant renewal, not just economically or socially, but spiritually. Because these cycles do more than structure order, they count down toward a day, the day of return. Jubilees, whose very name means the Book of the Jubilees, is not merely a historical record, it is a prophetic clock. If we understand God's cycles, we will understand when grace is opened and when judgment begins. Imagine each generation is not just a time of living, but a step closer to the end. If the Jubilee year repeats faithfully, then great events, the flood, Sinai, the Exodus, the exile, all happened on God's appointed milestones. And if that is true, then the return, the day the Son of Man comes in glory, is no accident. Perhaps God engraved it into the calendar from the beginning. But because we forgot the true calendar, we no longer know where we are in the plan. It is not that God hid the time, but that we lost the clock and replaced it with the Babylonian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, the lunar cycle, trying to measure the divine. But when the original rhythm is off, all our predictions are only stumbling in the dark. The sacred calendar, if still kept, can reveal when the season of awakening comes, the season of redemption, and the season of return. Not with precise dates and hours, but with signs. And for those who are awake, the signs are enough to prepare the soul. The sacred calendar is not a dusty tool of the past. It is a forgotten prophecy, and if we do not listen, we may live through the spiritual harvest and never know it. We may pass through golden fields and leave with empty hands. The return may have been etched into time from the very beginning. And the question is no longer when, but rather, do we still know how to read his calendar, or are we living by a different schedule, only to be awakened too late? We have just journeyed not through space, but through time, that invisible thread that holds the entire sacred structure between man and God. And what has been exposed is not a loud, overt conspiracy, but a silent substitution. God's calendar wasn't destroyed, it was forgotten. No bloodshed, no decree, just centuries passing. as humanity gradually chose what was more convenient instead of what was more true. From fallen angels teaching lunar cycles, to Babylon and Rome enforcing civil calendars, to church councils standardizing feast dates. And so, heaven's rhythm was replaced by earth's. But this is not the end, because God's time still flows, quiet, hidden, but never stopping. And you, though living in a world out of sync, can still choose to step back into it. You don't need to change the whole world, just one thing. The awareness that each day, if placed in the sacred rhythm, can become an appointment. Start again with the small things. Study the 364-day cycle. Explore the real feast seasons in the Book of Jubilees. Keep the seventh day in true rest, as Adam, Enoch, and Abraham did, not because of legalism, but because you remember. You remember there is a God who placed time as a bridge to reach humanity. And you don't want to be late, don't want to miss the season, don't want to knock on heaven's door when it has already closed. The frightening thing is not that God hides, but that we have changed the appointment and assume he no longer shows up. But today, if you're listening, if you can still sense the faint pulse of a hidden rhythm, then know this: you are not too late. The sacred calendar still lives, not in an archive, but in your very soul. And you can choose to keep following the Babylonian calendar, the rhythm of chaos, or to return to God's calendar, the rhythm of encounter. One step is enough to begin. One right day is enough to reopen the sacred gate, and perhaps, in that silence, God has been waiting for you all along. The story you just heard may have begun thousands of years ago. But what lies beneath, the dissonance, the substitution, the silence, continues every day, in the way we live, work, rest, and worship. Have you ever considered that you may be living by a calendar you never chose? A calendar shaped by decisions far removed from God, far from the Patriarchs, far from the covenant forged in light. Have you ever passed through a sacred season and never knew a forgotten feast, a day meant for remembrance, reflection, and prayer? But you were busy, not because you don't love God, but because you didn't know it was the appointment. Pause, not to feel guilt, but to hear again the call of sacred time. The Book of Jubilees is not just an ancient text, it is a reminder of a rhythm you once had, but forgot, a divine clock that doesn't tick by seconds, but by encounters. And the question is not, do I believe in this book? But rather, is the time I'm living still in harmony with God? If somewhere deep inside something stirs, a soul memory, a sense that something is not quite right in how we count the days, don't ignore it. Maybe you are one of the few who still remember the first rhythms, the seasons that were cut from church calendars, the feasts that have fallen from human memory. The days only heaven and the awakened soul still hold sacred. If you feel you're not just a listener, but a keeper, a reawakener, a storyteller, a reliver of heaven's timetable, then begin with one small act. Ask time again, trace the breath of God, and choose to live as Adam, Enoch, Noah, and Abraham once did. None of them needed a clock. They only needed faithfulness. You don't need to fix the whole world. Just reset your own appointment with God. Because some stories never end. They live quietly in the way you choose to live each day. And this story today will continue where else, if not in your heart. Amen.